So welcome everybody to this episode of Cultivating Ideas. Today's topic, the title is Planting Seeds in Blood-Stained Soil, the Legacy of Early Baptist Missions in the Borderlands. What a great title and quite intriguing. Looking forward to the conversation today. I'm Reverend Phil Dickey. I serve as the Director of Congregational Innovation at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And it's my joy to get to sit here and be a part of this conversation. Today we have as our guest Dr. Angel J. Gallardo, he's the assistant professor of church history at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, where he teaches courses on the history of Christian thought and race and religion in the Americas. Prior to joining Austin Seminary, Dr. Gallardo served on the faculty of Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. In addition to representing APTS on the board of the Hispanic Summer Program, Dr. Gallardo also serves as the co-chair of the Latino Religion, Culture, and Society program unit in the American Academy of Religion and Society of Biblical Literature. Dr. Gallardo's scholarship reimagines the origins of Christianity in the Americas by examining the legacy of figures like Christopher Columbus and Bartolomé de las Casas. He is currently working on his first book, tentatively titled Mapping the Nature of Empire. It narrates how, in the wake of 1492, a scholastic view of the natural order informed and contested the racial and geographic hierarchies that emerged in the early modern world, which sounds fantastic, and I cannot wait for your book to come out. I love that topic, and Las Casas was very influential on me through seminary as well, so I'll be interested to check that out. Today's presentation, however, ventures into new ground. It builds on a paper delivered at Oxford University in August as part of the Baptist Scholars International Roundtable. A revised version will be published in an edited volume as Baylor University Press next year. As Dr. Gallardo presents, you're welcome to drop your questions you have in the chat, but really we'll have time for chat or for Q&A at the end. So you're welcome to just jot them down so you don't forget them as well. And then we'll have an opportunity kind of at the second half of the conversation here to or for the presentation, the second half of it, to have a real good conversation around what is presented. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Angel J. Gallardo for his presentation today.
Well, thank you, Phil, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this muggy afternoon. So, full disclosure, I am not Baptist. I am United Methodist, and so when I first proposed this topic as a paper for the conference that it was for, the first question that I got was, why are you writing about Baptists if you're not Baptist? Which is fair. And the reason is because this was the topic of the conference was Baptist and global missions, and so in order to participate in this conference, this is the topic that I ended up proposing, and it was accepted, fortunately. So today's talk builds on this new research that I conducted over the last year or so, and as Phil mentioned in the kind introduction, this ventures into new territory for me because my area of expertise is really the 15th century, 15th and 16th century. And think 1492 and sort of the 50 years before and the 50 years after in the Atlantic world. And so writing, doing historical research on a subject, that is really, takes place in the middle of the 19th century, right, in 1800s, right, and in the Texas-Mexico borderlands is outside of my wheelhouse, right? But as a scholar, as a professor, I'm always trying to learn and to challenge myself, and also to understand the kind of the history that we inhabit here. So let me share a little about the idea of and how I got interested in this subject, and then I want to kind of give you a summary of the argument that I carry out in this paper, and then outline how I made that argument in four parts. And so I first started thinking about about this subject because last year a former colleague of mine, a former professor here at Austin Seminary, who's now at Baylor, Dr. João Chavez, published a book with Mercer Press titled "The Global Mission of the Jim Crow South." And it was a fascinating book, something I had never really thought about. And it basically traced the history of Confederates, of mainly Baptists, Southern Baptists, and other Baptists in what was the Confederacy that ended up leaving the United States and going to Brazil after the Civil War, so late 19th, early 20th century, essentially. He traces how they went to Brazil because Brazil was essentially the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. It did so. In some regions, even until like 1910, quite late. And so, he traces how they tried to implement sort of a white civilization, white Christian society in Brazil. And I thought that was really fascinating. And so that sparked my curiosity, and I started looking into, well, how, what is the, what are the origins of the Baptist Church in Mexico? And I mentioned that I was Methodist, but as a former Baptist, I grew up in a Latino multicultural church in East LA, where my immediate family still lives, and so I was very interested in kind of the sort of the origins of Baptist in Mexico and broadly speaking in the borderlands. And what I came to find out was that the First Baptist Church was founded in 1864. 1864. And if that date sounds familiar, it's because it was, well, a lot of things happened that year, but I was right smack in the middle of the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. And the first church was founded by this figure to my left, a preacher named an Irishman named James Hickey, who was born in 1800 and died in 1866. And James Hickey founded the first church, and this is a photo of it here that I'm covering up, in what's now in the city of Monterrey, which is in northern Mexico, just a few hours south of Austin. And so I started digging around, and one of the interesting things that sort of galvanized my interest was the fact that he was referred to as an abolitionist, right? Scholars, both writers in his own period, as well as all of the sort of the historians of Baptist missionaries and the Baptist Church in this region, referred to him as someone who opposed slavery. Oh, the camera's doing something funny. Let's see. All right, there we go. As someone who opposed slavery, as someone who abhorred slavery. And so that got me really fascinated. And what I came to find out was that while a lot of the scholarship on James Hickey, praised him as the founder of the Baptist Church, the founder of even Protestantism, he's even referred to by some Mexican scholars as the founder of the evangelical faith in Mexico or Mexican soil. No one had really considered with any great detail the ways that the conflicts over slavery in Texas, in particular, in the U.S., related to James Hickey's missionary ventures and to the broader Baptist endeavors to spread, evangelical faith in south of the border. And so that basically that inspired me to kind of like tackle that subject, tackle that kind of as a historian, one approach to scholarship is to sort of address a gap, right? A sort of an issue or a question that the historiography, has not quite addressed yet. And so that became sort of my focal point. And essentially, in my research, what I came to see, and what I argued in this paper, and the thesis that I want to kind of entertain for our time today is the following. My research essentially traces how an imperialist vision of geographic expansion compelled the earliest Baptist missionaries to conduct a project that entailed the violent dispossession of Mexican territory and the extension of slavery westward into Texas. That's essentially the argument that I carried out in this paper. And I did so in 4 parts. In the first part, what I did was I narrated how James Hickey arrived in Texas. Right, he was born in Ireland, really close to Northern Ireland, and how he ended up, coming to this part of the world. The second part examines how Baptist missions emerge within 2 broader geopolitical struggles: the Texas Rebellion, which is 1936, and the North American invasion of Mexico. And so in this here behind me now is a map of the territory that was Mexico prior to the invasion of what's called the North American invasion of Mexico, that essentially dispossessed half of Mexico's territory. So all of the orange, that was all territory that was dispossessed from Mexico following what's called the U.S.-Mexico War, the North American invasion. And of course, this occurred immediately before James Hickey got there, and so he arrives right as this process is solidifying. And so the second part traces these things and explores how the conflicts over slavery and territorial dispossession impacted Hickey's own trajectory. In the third part, I turn to consider the expanding missionary frontier in the mid-19th century. So I look at the ways that different missionary societies, particularly Baptists, but even others in Philadelphia, those based in Philadelphia, in New York City, and the senior representatives, how they deployed a discourse of geographic expansion to expand their global mission. And here you should be thinking manifest destiny, right? The idea that God has given essentially white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans the distinguished call or mission project to expand westward, and that basically the U.S. should in fact extend from coast to coast, and it gave them the sort of justification to expand westward, and that entailed the violent dispossession of Mexican territory. And so and so by doing this, the third part, what I do is I examine the impact of U.S. imperialism by showing how Hickey and others relied on the U.S. military to spread the gospel in Mexico. And one thing that I found quite fascinating, and Hickey's not the first, but he's not the first, but he's one of many what are called colporteurs, which are basically agents of either the American Bible Society, the American Tract Society, and other interdenominational agencies that basically recruited money, tons of money, to buy Bibles and different tracts, different essentially Christian literature, and then distribute that around the world. And Hickey was commissioned by the American Tract Society initially in southern Texas in the 1860s, and what they did was essentially use the U.S. military to distribute Bibles in Spanish throughout Mexico during the wars, the different wars of that were taking place. And so these Bible societies welcomed, they in fact celebrated the fact that the U.S. decided to wage war westward in order to invade and take over what was Mexico's northern territories, because that provided them what they called a sort of a launch. They conceived of as a launching pad, as a kind of a base of operations was actually the term that was used for missions in the borderlands and then south of the border. And central to that was the dissemination of Bibles through these colporteurs like James Hickey by using members of the U.S. military. And so after I outlined that process, I traced that process. In the fourth section of the fourth and final section of the paper, I stop and I look at how, I pose the question: how did Baptist missionaries understand their own work in that time? Right. So we're talking, 1860s, right? Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm back in focus. How did Baptist missionaries understand their own work? And so, how did they conceive of their own project, their own mission? And one of the central voices that kind of captures the spirit of the age, so to speak, is a figure by the name of Chastain, James Chastain. And he wrote a book called 30 Years in Mexico that was commissioned by the various Baptists, both Northern and Southern Baptists, in 1927. So essentially 100 years ago, just under 100 years ago. And it was commissioned, and he served as a missionary for, I think, about close to 20 years, both in Mexico and in Puerto Rico. And he also served as, he played a lot of roles. He was an important figure. And I look at his text, 30 Years in Mexico, and the reason why I decided to do that, the thing that really kind of initially shocked me, was how he outlined his Baptist intervention. And the book is essentially 9 chapters, right? And the main bulk of it deals with Spanish colonialism. And so he starts the book with Christopher Columbus. He starts the book with the so-called discovery of the New World, Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador who invaded and took over Mexico City, and he goes actually with actually considerable sophistication. I mean, citing primary sources, he's drawing on even contemporary scholars and historians of his own day to essentially paint a picture, draw an arc of a historical arc of missionary intervention in Mexico, beginning with the Spanish and essentially being perfected or culminating with North American Baptist intervention. And the major distinction that he puts forth in his book that I found actually quite telling was that, unlike the Spanish missionary ventures that occurred or began in the 16th century, those were predicated on two, what he calls, faulty and human foundations: papal authority and kingly authority or royal authority, right? And what he says is, essentially the Spanish got some things right, but they claim their claim over this territory is predicated on these two faulty things, whereas Baptists and North American Baptists in particular, we are our mission is on something much more stable, much more sound, and that is the authority of Scripture. And so he, that's a very, very Baptist kind of explanation, right? So essentially, what I go on to show is how Chastain and the first generation of missionaries after Hickey articulate their own missionary interventions as a neo-colonialist project, right? One that is an improvement upon the Spanish efforts, beginning with Columbus, Hernán Cortés, continuing on to the 17th and 18th century, but basically predicated on the authority of Scripture as sort of the bona fide grounds upon which military and religious intervention abroad is conducted. So that's essentially the arc of the argument. And of course, for us in the borderlands, I think that this raises a lot of sort of questions about how we understand the relationship between U.S. imperialism and missions, right, and different Christian agencies, and the sort of the less than obvious intersections between things like the institution of slavery and the territorial dispossession of what was Texas and the earliest Baptist seeds in this part of the world. And so with that being said, I want to show a few more images. One thing that I show in that I discovered, and I have to credit one of my current students, David Angulo, for introducing this map to me. This map was produced by it's in the Library of Congress, and it was produced by the Department of the Interior, and it shows, based on density, the darkest parts have a higher density of the enslaved population in the southern states in 1860. So here we're talking 1860, right when James Hickey is in southern Texas, and right before the U.S. the Civil War takes off. And here you see where basically what's this area here is essentially the Mississippi. This is Louisiana, and of course further west, I guess I can't point to it, but is Texas. And you see how Houston is very, very dark. And the part that I've edited and zoomed in is Austin. Austin, if you see there, had basically almost a quarter of the population of Austin, of this county, of Travis County, was enslaved. And one thing that I discovered in my research was that Hickey actually had to flee Mexico. He started preaching in 1856, and he had to flee Mexico because of the anti-Protestant sentiment in that area. And he came to live in Bell County, which is just 45 minutes north of where Austin Seminary is today. And the more I dug into the history, the more I found out how the context, right? Because remember, one of the central questions that I began asking is how is it that Hickey is credited to be an abolitionist and to oppose slavery, but there's very little actual of his own, I had really difficult time finding any evidence of his own writing regarding his views of slavery, or abolitionists or abolitionism, how that influences preaching or his theology or anything like that. But one thing that I did find out was that he relocated to Bell County, and the year that he moved there, there was a slave plantation, a cotton plantation that belonged to a very important figure in Texas named it's the Robinson family that immigrated from, I believe, from Tennessee. Precisely to Texas from Tennessee was where they were part of the the initial settlers that were interested in expanding slavery westward into Texas. And so these are pictures that I took. This is an image from the Texas Historical Society, and this is an image of the slave quarters of the plantation. The picture was taken in 1970, so hence the quality. But I took these two photos actually on the way to a faculty retreat earlier this year in August, after I wrote the paper. And this is actually part of the historical, it's a historic site that's preserved by the state of Texas. It's actually one of the best preserved slave plantations in the state. And this is, and so that is something that I hope to integrate into my courses moving forward, because it's literally in our just in our backyard, and this slave plantation is really important because the Robertson family, they were instrumental in waging the war of rebellion against Mexico, or the War of Texas Independence, as it's sometimes called, as well as the Civil War. They were part of the Confederacy. They were part of the family. Some of the signatories of that waged war against Mexico and then seceded from the United States, and so they played a really important role in that process. This is an image of, this is a map also from, I believe this one's from the Library of Congress as well, that shows some of the initial, what were called settlements or colonies that the Mexican government allowed for different families, American families to come and settle. And this is an image of the house where what was called Bible House or Astor Place in New York City, in Manhattan, that did a lot of the fundraising, as well as for all the biblical literature and the Christian literature that was disseminated not just in Mexico but around the world in the mid and late 19th century. All right, so the last image is here, and this is actually a map from 1502 that illustrates something that Chastain, James Chastain, who I mentioned, the historian from 100 years ago, that he refers to. And you might not be able to tell, but if you okay, so this is one of it's historians debate this, but it's either the earliest or definitely one of the earliest. It's 1502, commissioned by the Portuguese crown to show basically where the New World is in relationship to the Old, right, and to the rest of mainly Western Europe. And you see a line that if you look at Africa, sort of West Africa, and you go westward, you see that horizontal line. That is the papal demarcation. It's called the papal demarcation, or the papal donation, it's also referred to. And that is what the line that Pope Alexander the Sixth issued right after Columbus returned from his first voyage, to show the territory that belonged to Spain. Spain was donated by the Pope authority and dominion over the territories to the west of that, and Portugal had dominion to the east of that line. And that line became a very contested border to determine the boundaries of empire in as early as 1502. So this is prior to Luther, okay, 1502. And this is the line that Chastain himself refers to when he's giving an account in 30 years in Mexico of Baptist interventions in the borderlands. So that concludes my presentation. I'm interested in hearing your questions and your thoughts, and I pass it over to my colleague Phil to get us going with that. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. And just this is kind of just open conversation, so you're welcome to raise a hand if you want to you can do on reactions, or just unmute and chime in for the question that you have. If you aren't able to speak right now and have a question you want to put in the chat, I'd be happy to read it for you. And just to let you know, we have about 20 minutes. Dr. Gallardo has to go teach a class right at 1 o'clock, so we have right at 20 minutes. But if the conversation's still rolling, we can excuse him. We can keep the conversation going as well. But the table is open for any conversation or any questions that are present.
Dr. Gallardo, this is Carlos Valadez. I want to thank you, sir, for your awesome presentation. Given the context that we're in right now, I'm afraid that you may be accused of being in the woke culture in Texas and in Florida for rewriting history instead of presenting history the way you've done it. I also applaud your effort in expanding the conversation. Much of the conversation in the U.S. history has been the black and white. It's refreshing to hear a Hispanic speaking up, and also bringing the portion of that. Some of the conversation in the United States has been dealing with reparations, mainly to the African American community. But I think if they're going to be talking reparations, I think there's a big event here to be able to open up to discuss the reparations of the land grabbing that was done to the Mexican citizens, not only in Texas, but all the way to Colorado, to Nevada, all the way to Montaña, which reaches up to Colorado. I wanted to ask you, sir, in your research, did you by any chance include the effects of the Monroe Doctrine and also the Treaty of Guadalupe, and how that affected the change in history? In my response to Phil's question, how is Christianity at the borderland? I see it as distorted. Many of these mission trips go with the mentality that we are the knight in shining armor, and we're going to go out there and help them, and we come back with feathers in our hat and another notch in a belt buckle, saying, you know what, we really did something for them, you know. But it was much of this missionary effort has been for self-edification and not for the development of the countries that we go to. The Justo Gonzalez, in his book of the History of Christianity, reports that the Christianity that reached Rome is not the Christianity that reached the Americas. The Christianity that left Jerusalem to Rome was the genuine Christianity of Christ, loving thy neighbor. When Constantine came into power, he had this vision, and with this you will conquer. From that moment on, the Europeans, Spanish, Portugal, England, all that came into the Americas have brought Christianity with the point of the sword, and the sword still continues today, but it's not a physical sword, but it's related in power. So the people who were printing Bibles and things like this, those people are in control of the narrative because they have the printing presses. And up until now, I am so grateful for your presentation, because I finally hear this conversation that I heard in Mexico when I was a student out there. My parents sent me to study out there over 40 years ago. That conversation that you presented today, I heard it there, but this is the first time I hear it in U.S. So congratulations, sir. And again, Monroe Doctrine and Guadalupe Treaty. Thank you, sir.
The Treaty of Guadalupe, yeah. No, well, thank you. Was it Jorge Valdez? Right?
Carlos Valadez.
Carlos Valdez, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, you put a lot of steak on the grill there. But to your question, here's the thing. It's not just who owns the printing presses, but who is in a position to the question is, who's in the position to write the sort of the dominant narrative, right? And it kind of, I mean, it goes to your initial comment that you made about sort of the kind of attack on wokeism, and this being used as a way to sort of tar historians and historical analysis that call into question the sort of what some scholars call the dominant Anglo narrative specifically of Texas. And so one book that really coincided, and it was really sort of inspiring for me, was Forget the Alamo. And actually finished reading it after I wrote this paper, but it basically tries to show how a lot of the myths and about Texas, the foundational myths of Texas, are not based in history. There's very little to no evidence to back them up, and one thing that they conceal. One thing that they conceal is the sort of the underlying reason for waging war against tyranny. The tyranny that the Texians, the white Texan settlers, were rebelling against were abolitionist laws that were being put forth by the Mexican federal government, right? So the tyranny was essentially, how dare this Mexican government try to outlaw our way of life, our economic system, predicated on the enslavement of Black people. And what they did was wage a war, right? And war of rebellion. Hence, and this goes to the other point that you raised about the Treaty of Guadalupe and the Monroe Doctrine. I didn't have a chance to go into great detail, but when I presented this paper at Oxford, Doug Weaver, who's the chair of the religion department at Baylor, pointed out that Baylor actually has in their archive, in the rare book archive, some of the foundational documents for sort of the Texas Republic, and he suggested that I use those to essentially develop this into a full-length book, instead of just keeping it as an article. And that would definitely, if I do that, that would entail engaging the Monroe Doctrine and the Treaty of Guadalupe and some of the other things that preceded James Hickey in particular. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Carlos. Others? I also dropped a reference to that book, Forget the Alamo, in the chat if you want to check it out as well. Rick, go ahead. Still muted, Rick. Let me see if I can.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I guess what caught my ear was the who controls and who dominates the news media and the narrative. And back in the 50s and 60s, Westerns series on TV were very popular. It's the myth of the Old West. Americans can do anything, and so forth. There was this myth, and it was used, I believe, as propaganda. The myth of the Old West was propaganda for white Americans, and I wonder, how do those that because I'm white, we have used in the past to profit from and to benefit from, and even used God, who tells us you're not supposed to do this stuff, as a basis for propagandizing this idea that we can do what we want because it's in some way we're chosen. And I think Rupert Murdoch owns many of the news outlets in our country. And so how, and I don't know if, there doesn't have to be an answer right now, but what I wonder is how do people who are woke, and I don't find that as a derogatory word, because that if I'm not woke, then I'm asleep. And so what do I want to be? Awake or asleep? And those of us who are awake, how do we start obtaining or getting into the mainstream news media where the truth can be told on a broader scale?
That's a doozy, and I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, but I do think that you put your finger on something really important, that as a theological educator, and for those of you students or also involved in theological education, whether at the local parish level or in the seminary, in the classrooms, one thing that constantly comes up is actually something that I learned when I was in divinity school, and that is that at the heart of the imperialist project post 1492 is the theological idea that white Western European Christians have superseded Israel as God's chosen people. That heretical idea is the seed out of which various waves and phases of colonialism over the last 500 years have continued to develop and to expand. And so I think that's that way of thinking is alive and well in many of our churches, in many of our textbooks, in many of our sermons. And so I think that being attuned to that and trying to expose that for what it is part of it's got to be part of the solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick, for your question. If somebody jump in if they have a question, but I'll build on that just a little bit, and the idea of if the Baptists felt like they were evolving their authority, imperial authority, from kind of papal, the crown, if you will, to scripture, do you see that there's a next evolution taking place in the ever evolving imperialism that is happening worldwide? As a good Methodist, right? United Methodist here, like, is it tradition? Is it reason? Is it experience? Right? Like, is there the next evolution?
Yeah. The short answer is I don't know. I think that's an excellent question, and I think that's a question that I would punt. I would toss the ball over to the missiologists and the folks doing global Christianity. But I think that one thing that is certain is that the imperialism that started this is no longer what's the dominant sort of imperial system or of power today, and so we have to turn our critique and our attention to sort of global capitalism and the ways in which that ends up sort of laying down the terms upon which civilized Christianity can develop. And so one thing, and it actually is connected to this history, because one of the things that I learned in my research, and this here I learned from historian, longtime historian at the University of Houston, John Hart, who basically shows how the boards of J.P. Morgan Chase and J.P. Morgan and Chase Bank and Citibank funded all kinds of politicians in Congress and different propaganda efforts to promote the idea of Western expansion, precisely in the buildup to the North American invasion of Mexico, because they saw it as prime real estate to build railways westward and into northern Mexico, and in order to further their economic interests. And so, the thing is that the missionary societies echoed and built on that, and promoted the kind of the benefits of basically capitalist growth in the mid-19th century. And so did members of the ruling class in Mexico. So it wasn't just one-sided, because they saw it as beneficial, as having an opportunity to establish monopolies or to further business interests. And I think that in many ways that continues to be a very sort of set the terms for the kind of the global system that we inhabit today. So I think that would be, the kind of the analysis would have to turn that way.
Dr. Gallardo has 5 more minutes if we have another question. Anybody else have a question?
I have a different kind of question for Dr. Gallardo. I'm wondering, when Baptist missionaries were trying to convert their hearers to their version of the Christian faith, were they more concerned about luring them away from the errors of popery, or were they more concerned to sort of give them a racialized hierarchy of the world and explaining to them their relative subordination to the white missionaries?
Tim, that's an excellent question. It's actually both. So pretty much in all of the missionary literature, the evils of popery, of basically of Roman Catholicism, and that is ubiquitous in the Baptist literature and missionary literature in general in this period. So Henry Morehouse, who was like the general secretary of the American Bible Society, he's actually the Morehouse that Morehouse College in Atlanta is named after. He uses this language a lot. So that is definitely there. But part of what I think, at least from what I've seen, in doing the research for this paper, what I saw was that the kind of the racial imagination of white supremacy was sort of integral to, was sort of a subtext, it was integral to the kind of missionary efforts, right? Of sort of because the kind of the logic was become more like us, and by becoming more like us, you will become more like what God wants you to be, right? And so the kind of the white ideal was the sort of was the template on which both in terms of the racialization, and you see this in the laws that passed in Texas after Texas went from being part of Mexico to its own republic, and then subsequently part of the U.S. and then a Confederate state. You see this in the laws that were passed there, and this is actually what surprised and really undermined a lot of the Tejanos, the Mexicans in Texas and Texas prior to the War of Independence, that they thought that they were going to be equal citizens along with, the white Texians. And when they gained, independence from Mexico, the laws that were implemented took their land away, excluded them from all kinds of positions of power, and it implemented a whole racial hierarchy and slavery in what was Mexican territory. In Mexico, the white dominant class didn't have the same power, right? And that's why I think that but where there's continuity is in the kind of the economic and capitalist systems that sort of restructure the borderlands into what we see today.
Well, friends, if you'll join me in either applauding, shaking, whatever you want to do to give a gratefulness to Dr. Gallardo. We are indeed grateful for your presentation and for all the research you've done. And it sounds like you have a lot of work to do to finish that book then to turn it into a full book, right? No pressure.
No pressure, right?
Yeah, no pressure at all. Well, thank you so much for your time. And for everybody who's joined us again for Cultivating Ideas, next week we'll be back here at the same time, December 7th. Professor Margaret Amer, Academic Dean and Professor of New Testament Studies, will explore who was the Ethiopian eunuch. In Acts 8, we read about an Ethiopian eunuch, an unnamed pilgrim to Jerusalem who appears in Luke's story of the church and then disappears after an encounter with Philip. So who was the Ethiopian eunuch and how does their role fit into the story of faith? This Bible story takes us through the story of the eunuch as a story of exile, slavery, homecoming, and the witness of the early church. So again, same link. We'll be back here at the same time next week. We hope you'll join us then. And once again, Dr. Gallardo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Blessings to you all.
Blessings.